Our brain is active all the time trying to infer things about the world. What is this world? What is going on here? And it's using relevant cues, but also irrelevant cues. And once it gets these cues, it uses them to interpret the world. Our perception of value is dramatically subjective. It comes from lots of things from the environment. Neoclassical economics has a very simple answer. Something's value is whatever people are willing to pay for it. But the deeper question of what value is much more complex. One of the experiments we did on purchases was to sell people coffee. We had the regular condiments, milk and sugar and cream and so on. But we also had these 6 condiments that nobody ever uses. Lemon peel and cardamom and stuff like that. And sometimes we put these condiments in a beautiful metal and glass containers with a little spoon and so on. And sometimes they were in styrofoam cups, kind of torn. We wrote it in a felty pen, really ugly. And now the question is, do these things that were on the side that nobody ever used influence the perception of how good the coffee was? The answer was absolutely yes. And they also influence how much people are willing to pay. They're willing to pay about twice as much. I have a friend who's an expert in wine. We continuously have this discussion about what's the right way to figure out the value of wine. If you do blind tasting of wine, you taste the wine, you have no idea about it, it turns out the correlation between price and quality is basically 0. More expensive wine is not perceived as better quality than cheaper wine. When you know the price, now it does have a positive correlation because your expectation that this wine is going to get better actually changes the way you experience it and therefore change the value. So it's actually very difficult to think about what is the value of something.
We fight a lot about the role of profit and its primacy in business. Profit's a healthy thing. Profit is a metric of sustainability. Without being profitable, we don't get to be here. But there has also arisen this false equality around profit. A couple years ago, a couple Harvard Business School professors wrote an article called Creating Shared Value. What they said was, there's a new way of thinking about how businesses can serve. Philanthropy is the old way. Philanthropy is sharing wealth that's already been created. But a better way is to create wealth by serving. And so in creating shared value, you then have to say, well, that's interesting because now we're going to create a profitable business that does good. And they coined a phrase that I just love. They said all profits are not created equal. Those that carry a social benefit are better. So let's stop arguing about this. Because if you're an investor, why wouldn't you invest in a company that returns adequate reward to you, but also does good? If you're a government, why wouldn't you favor those businesses? Why wouldn't you look for businesses that do good in addition to making a profit? And then here's the rub. If you're a business leader and you're competing for capital, why wouldn't you choose a business model that does good in addition to rewarding shareholders? Because you yourself will be rewarded. And so now all of a sudden we've just changed the incentives completely. All profits are not created equal. Let's be honest about that. Those that carry a social benefit are better.
NAFTA was the wake-up call. NAFTA was the epiphany. NAFTA not only destroyed my personal life, destroyed my business. I was making a six-figure salary. I was driving a BMW. I had a nice home. I had a great wife. I had lived a country club membership. I played golf on weekends. It just destroyed everything that they told us, in business school, everything that I felt like I was on the path to do, the people I was associated, the direction I was going. I was a pretty hardcore Republican in those days. I was living, I was in this kind of that matrix. I was living in this world that, hey, it all seemed great. And NAFTA was that kind of breaking point. Maybe this path's not the path I need to be on. We're a t-shirt printer. We're a custom wholesale t-shirt printer. Here in North Carolina was a big textile hub. And I had lots of friends and a lot of companies that either made that venture overseas or they went out of business. But we did not want to do that. We just felt, even in the mid-90s, there was something wrong with this scenario that, yeah, we're going to outsource to make more money here, but then we're going to sell our product to a person we just laid off. It just didn't really make much sense to us. Mid-90s, we changed the mission of TS Designs. We want to be a successful company while looking after our people, the planet, and profit. So everything we do, every decision we make, every product we buy has to ask, what's the impact, not only to the bottom line, what's it going to cost the company, but what's going to be the impact of the planet and the people. We felt like it's important not only to talk about this stuff, but demonstrate, to step out there and do these things. So we're in a little industrial park here, put our first tracking array. Golly, that thing's 12 years old, 13 years old. Never forget when we first put it up. I mean, that was the second one in Alamance County, the biggest one in Alamance County. A lot of people thought it was some type of satellite dish. What kind of TV station will pick up on that thing? I like to describe sustainability being a journey, not a destination. And I'll be on that journey to the day I die. We got wind, and we got solar, and we got biofuels, and we got chickens, and we got gardens, and we got bees. People say, how in the heck can you do that as a small business owner? What I've come to find out is once people realize that you have a care for a business beyond just maximizing your personal bottom line, then they'll want to support you. But a lot of times you're trying to extract information to benefit yourself. Once people realize you're trying to do something beyond just yourself, they want to help. That's one thing that we really lost focus on the last 20 or 30 years. We want to kind of pick out one piece and really maximize the efficiency of it, but we don't realize the impact that we're having to other parts of the system. So it's reconnecting those dots. And that's exactly what we're trying to do at TS Designs, is be an example of a business that wants to reconnect and be a part of this local living system that we deal in. We got an early wake-up call. We could have fought and resisted to not go that direction, but NAFTA allowed us to make that transition. So we've been on this journey a lot longer than most people have.
Things happen that change how people value things. Often what we try to do is we are in one state of the world, and we're trying to predict how we would feel about life if we were in a different state of the world. And we have a very hard time doing it. So we say, oh, how would life look like if I married this person? Or how would life look like if I bought this house or bought this car or moved to California, whatever it is. And we often have all kinds of perception and beliefs about how life will be, but then life changes and then we don't become the same people.
Having children, and that's probably true for many parents, is when you start to really think about, well, I want my baby to grow up healthy. How am I going to do that? It was then that I became much more conscious about knowing where food comes from and how badly, unfortunately, the United States is doing in terms of letting us all know where our food comes from, labeling whether or not it's got a genetic modification in it. having it be a monoculture that could in fact collapse. So it's still cool season here in Asheville, and a good time to plant beets and chard. This is Chioggia beet, which is a wonderful heirloom seed. It's a beautiful beet that grows, there we go, into beautiful globes of rings of color. The beet is, on the inside, is both red and white, so it makes for a beautiful salad. I'm planting this between some other things, and it's not very hard to do, so. I, generally speaking, don't plant things in rows, just because I don't like rows. That sometimes makes it hard to find them again. When I started the company, I wanted to essentially, in a small way, create the world I wanted to live in. And that would not be terribly hierarchical or authoritarian. I wanted people who worked for So True Seed to have a sense that their jobs were important and a certain empowerment to make those jobs better. We were gung-ho on finding the seeds and connecting with farmers and growing seed and doing the kind of evangelical things that we wanted to do. However, we didn't have a business plan. I didn't know that P&L meant profit and loss. I learned a great deal about the necessity of making a business a business. That is to say, the basis for sustainability is being able to pay for yourself. One of my favorite things in the world is Swiss chard, and especially the rainbow chard, because it's so beautiful. It withstands heat better than other greens. So they look like beet seeds, and that's because they're in the same family. Swiss chard is. We want a sustainable company, and that means a whole bunch of things. Basically, a company to be sustainable has to be able to pay for itself. But also, we want to be able to sustain ourselves and the community. The way we nourish that is to be part of the community. We try to buy everything that we need locally. We have a community program, for instance, where you can come in and exchange seed for working. We have wonderful educational programs so people can come in and learn how to plant their seeds. We donate leftover seeds to local community gardens, to schools. The result is that we are loved. And it's very, very heartening, not just to me, because it doesn't just extend to me, it's for all of us, that we're a part of the community. We're sustainable by virtue of making enough money to cover our costs, and by employing people and being part of this community. It's very, very, I don't know how to express the kind of value you get from that.
Business is a powerful force for positive social change. One of the only ways to think about that is that we've seen business be a powerful force for negative social change a lot of times. And we've gotten to the place where we're not surprised by that anymore. Bangladeshi factory collapses, 1,000 people die, and it's a horrible thing, but people kind of, shake their heads and think, well, it's just another example of the bad behavior of business. You don't have to shift the frame too much to think, well, wait a minute, it's not that there were people in Bangladesh making things. What if they'd been in a safe factory? What if they'd been paid a living wage in a place where there's not much work? Well, then all of a sudden it's pretty simple to see that that might have been a good thing. What if the goods they were working on were made from organic cotton grown close by? then all of a sudden now we've made an environmental statement that's powerful and positive. So there are all kinds of ways that the very same transaction could have done good instead of doing bad. We think about this in ways that today seem like the exception, and they seem fringe, right? So the biofuel industry makes all the sense in the world, but it seems a little bit like it's not something that we run into every day. And so that's, to me, the bigger challenge for business is not to have people begin to even anymore conceive that business can be a force for positive social change. It is to say, how do we scale the change?
I've been making fuel since 2002. Started in the backyard, just trying to meet my family's fuel needs. And we scaled up and became a cooperative. And then from there, we scaled up to this place in Pittsburgh, which is our industrial plant. Our story is one of trying to scale up. We've been permanently out of fuel. And we still are to this day. This is a 1 million gallon biodiesel plant, and we still can't make enough fuel to meet demand. We make what's called B100 biodiesel, or 100% bio. Our biodiesel is a renewable fuel made from waste that can be put into any diesel engine. So we have a cooperative of members that drive around in Volkswagens and Mercedes and Dodge trucks and these kinds of things. And our biodiesel can go directly into any diesel engine as a replacement for petroleum fuel. We collect used and waste fats, oils, and greases from within around 50 miles of our plant. And we bring them here and we spin them into fuel, and then we put that fuel back out into the same community. So the members of Piedmont Biofuels, they're off the petroleum grid. They are not attached to war, spills in the Gulf, or pipeline eruptions, or anything that has to do with the oil industry has really nothing to do with us. We are an RSB accredited facility. That is the Roundtable on Sustainable Biofuels. That's out of Switzerland. And that is a fiendishly complex accreditation that essentially measures the sustainability value of our fuel. We're the only biodiesel producer in the United States to have that accreditation. And that's important because not all biofuels are created equal, and biofuels are not without sin. When we started this, we'd show up in, at a fast food restaurant and say, hey, can we have the grease out of your dumpster? And I think that people just thought we were quirky. As time wore on and people started realizing that, maybe there was something to climate change and maybe we did have a problem with petroleum, there was a moment there when biofuels were going to save the world, and they became very big, and it was crazy. We became rock stars. We were sort of heroes in the biodiesel movement. Along came I guess it was the summer of 2008, world commodity prices went to an all-time high, when Bear Stearns died, and the world changed. But what happened there was biofuels became evil. That's when we were on the front cover of Time magazine as the greatest hoax ever perpetrated against the American people. And that's when the United Nations came out and said anyone making biofuels should be charged with crimes against humanity. And there was some truth to that, because what biodiesel did in our industry is let's do this. Let's go to Malaysia, let's burn down the rainforest, and let's plant oil palm trees all in a row. And let's squish the seeds and take out the oil and put the oil on a super tanker and send it to Seattle and spin it into fuel and put it on a rail car and send it to North Carolina and put it on a truck and take it out to the airport. And after the airport has burned enough of it, let's give them a prize for being green. It's like, stop the madness. It's critically important to us that our feedstocks, what we use to make product, come from the local area. That if you're going to make a sustainable biofuel, that's rather important. So the RSB certification is, I think, quite important to us because it does let people know that not all biofuels are created equal. That's true of quality and also how they're made and from what they come from. You know, we wouldn't use palm oil. That's not what we're about.
Businesses have to run well, for-profit and non-profit alike, in order to be able to accomplish their really high purposes. We think a lot about the efficacy of social enterprises, and we have a little 3-cell model. First, you have to do important work. And that's just fundamental. The point of your work has to improve the quality of life in communities in some way. You have to do important work. The second thing is you have to do the important work well. That means you have to be financially sustainable, but it also means that you have to create a workplace that's good for all. A brutal workplace that forces people to be unsustainably self-sacrificial isn't anything to be proud of. You have to be able to treat your employees well as well as your customers and all other stakeholders. So you have to do that important work well, and then third, you have to move your work to scale. And you have to find a way to be selfless, collaborate with the other folks who can come together to help you scale that work. And often, for-profit and non-profit alike, we're not great at that kind of ego-free collaboration. So do important work, do the important work well, move it to scale.
In 1840, there were no seed companies. People swapped seeds, they saved seeds, they got them from the people on the other side of the mountain. Still here, there are beans that are named after families because they've been saved for so long. Those seeds are disappearing because you can't buy them from big companies. So it's we small seed companies, and there are several of us scattered all over the country, that are trying to save the biodiversity, the different kinds of varieties of seeds. And the reason to do that can be well illustrated in the Irish potato famine. Potatoes come from Peru and Ecuador, and there are hundreds of kinds of them. Ireland, in the 1800s, was growing 5 kinds, and those potatoes got a blight, and it affected every one of them. If they had been growing 25 or 30 kinds of potatoes, chances are pretty good that 1 or 2 or 3 of those potatoes would have been blight resistant. But they weren't, and millions of people, as I recall, starved because of the lack of biodiversity. Well, now we have genetically engineered corn. It's the same one being planted time after time after time, year after year. It's depleting the soil, and now we're noticing there are blights that are happening, and they're happening to the whole crop. So the reason to save your seed, have 100 kinds of tomatoes, in your region is that should a blight come along or a bug, one of them or 5 of them are going to be resistant, and that's how Mother Nature works. And we want to help out.
What the apparel industry has done since the mid-90s is they've run around the world utilizing cheap energy, chasing cheap labor. But even the business schools, the Chamber of Commerce, the Department of Commerce, all the economic folks says your labor is your most expensive cost of doing business in apparel manufacturing, so you need to outsource it. Fast forward today, see what that's gotten us. Devastated local economies, very high unemployment. Our employees are by far our most valuable asset. We have taken major hits at TS Designs, not only personally, financially, what we've tied up and had to give up, but we've always maintained retirement benefits. We've always maintained health benefits. Then what we did behind us represents our whole garden system. So all the produce that comes out of the garden, all the eggs that come from our chickens go back to our employees to make them healthier, so they basically are more productive. They're going to be less likely to be sick. We changed our company policy. Every employee that works at TS Designs, if there is work needed to be done in the garden, we pay them to work in the garden. We had employees that were never connected to this environment. We had employees that when we first started bringing squash and zucchini and asparagus out of the garden, had no idea what it was. We're very transparent with our employees, what we do and why we do it. Some of them get aboard immediately. Some take time. As long as they're supporting what we do at TS Designs, we produce high quality, sustainable t-shirts, then as long as they're meeting that job, that's what they're mostly valued on. But over time, they're understanding the value of what we've done here with the garden. I like to describe what we do as, this is something we're passionate, but it's not a religion I'm going to jam down your throat. We have no employees that smoke. We have no employees that are overweight. Not because we have some rule or mandate that says you can't be fat and you can't smoke. It's just this environment that we started to create around them. It's a system. We're all connected together. Our employees having access to local healthy food is just as important to us as producing sustainable t-shirts.
There's something in the human animal that says, if I can make a gallon, wow, maybe I could make 100 gallons. If I can make 100 gallons, I can make 1,000,000 gallons. If I can make 1,000,000, I can make 100 million gallons. Someone managed to put it in our heads that big is better and the economies of scale are what can drive pricing down. And at the end of the day, it is exactly that that's driving us into environmental ruin. Especially when it comes to energy. If you think about energy and your energy choices, you can't graduate from college and say, I'm going to be a utility company. That's not going to happen because we've dealt out a monopoly and we have this massive scale, a nuclear plant that is, so expensive it would never get built without government subsidy. Well, really, energy is the perfect example of how that should all be reversed. Energy should be made where it's consumed. If you're going to drive, you should be taking the waste products from your community, turning it into fuels, and using that to drive. If you're going to power your house, it should be done with solar panels. We should be moving to a distributed generation model of all of our energy consumption. That's what sustainability will look like in the future. It won't be an oppressive top-down infrastructure that you really have no role in. You know, you can turn off the lights when you're not using them, but you can't really go into the utility business very easily. In the future, that absolutely will change. So the next 100 million gallons of biodiesel should not come from a 100 million gallon plant in the harbor. The next 100 million gallons should come from 100 little Piedmonts. There should be one on the edge of every town. In our case, we're using cooking oil. If you have another community that's, you know, has a lot of rotting apples, well, we should be using rotting apples. And, you know, they should power themselves from the waste streams that are, you know, biospecific in their bioregion. The sustainability movement, you know, are we just a bunch of dirty hippies with exhaust that smells funny? Our exhaust tends to smell like French fries. The reality is, of course, there's technology involved, there's invention involved. And actually, if you're going to get at that conservation resource, you're not going to do it by rubbing sticks together to start the fire. You're going to do it by, say, coming up with an LED light bulb that uses a fraction of the electricity but produces the same amount of lumens. That kind of invention and progress is something that you're going to find, I think, at every level of society. So I think the future of biodiesel will come from deeper in the waste stream. And the way you drill deeper into the waste stream is through the technology. Today you might say, oh, I can't touch that stuff. But tomorrow you'll say, this will make a fine fuel. In all things, there's probably a constant need for improvement. Certainly true of the biodiesel space. It's true in the sustainability movement in general. It's true even if you look at our corporate structures. There's obviously vast room for improvement there. There's a screaming need for integrity, authenticity, and transparency.
Think about something like trust, which is incredibly important in society. Imagine for a second how it would feel like to live in a society with no trust. You would have to lock your car and your house and not have a bank account and all kinds of things. It would be really, really tough. Nevertheless, it is not clear that we have a good trade-off between what we're willing to pay for something and trust. What we often find is that some things come into play in what we call sacred values. So as long as we have sacred values, we put tremendous value on things like trust and social and public good. But the moment they come into the market relationship and we have regular trade-offs with them, I think their value is going to be really vastly diminished, because all of those things on a per moment transaction are worthwhile giving up. Trust, I want in principle, but right now if you gave me a lot of money, maybe it's worthwhile to sacrificing. Pollution, I want the world to be clean, but right now if you gave me something, maybe I would sacrifice it. So I think that's why we have these sacred values and things we're not willing to trade off, because as human beings, every time we start trading off these values, we might think short term and sacrifice them too much.
I'm utterly convinced that sticking to principles is profitable. In a local community, it's profitable because people can trust you, and building trust is huge. At the moment, there is such an atmosphere of mistrust almost everywhere that it is of great value to this community that we remember that we really can trust each other and that we prove it by being trustworthy. And I think it's terribly important for a business in a community like this or anywhere to make sure that they're really upfront with their customers. And if you lose some customers that way, that's too bad. But in truth, most people want to be able to trust. I can tell you, for example, a couple of years ago, we sold garlic. This garlic had a blight on it, and we didn't find out until after we'd shipped it. So we went back at great expense and contacted everybody we shipped that garlic to. It was just one box, fortunately, and said, please be aware that this could be blighted, check it, send it back if you don't want it, or just throw it away. We'll happily resupply you. It cost us a lot of money to do that. And I can't tell you how many customers have commented on how much they are willing to buy seeds and other things from our company now because we went right out there and said, uh-oh, we goofed. I think that is sustainable, and I believe it's profitable.
If you make yourself transparent, it just builds an unbelievable trust factor. If there is a question I can't answer, or the thing that you want to, we will find that answer. There's no secrets. 5 years ago, we launched what we call the supply chain cotton of the Carolinas. And that has really been our focus. We've seen our biggest growth, our biggest interest. It's a lot like what's happened in the local food movement. People are starting to realize, I want to know where my food comes from. We want to do the same thing with apparel. We want to know where that apparel comes from. What we describe, make a shirt that's dirt to shirt in 600 miles, impacts 500 jobs, and in a completely transparent supply chain. As I said, when you get a Cotton of Carolinas t-shirt, now we have a style number that you drop into a website that brings you to a Google map, and that when that Google map pops up, you get not only a picture, a phone number, a physical address, an email of everybody involved in the supply chain: the farmer, the ginner, the spinner, the knitter, the finisher, the cut and sew, and then us, the print and dye. We make our supply chain completely transparent. Now, what they'll tell you in business school, you just basically told somebody your whole, how to compete with you. And what we like to say, we feel there's more benefit in being transparent compared to, yes, there's people that can see that information, and if they have enough money and they're foolish enough, they can be in the t-shirt business too.
Bring up values, and all of a sudden people start saying, "Ooh, I don't want to go there," because even the word values has been co-opted by a political group, a religious group, as being almost exclusionary or judgmental. That's not what it is. I mean, the word is much more fundamental. I love the work of a guy named Rush Kidder, who wrote a book a few years ago called Moral Courage. He went to every continent, went to 160 some countries, talked to people from every faith community, as well as folks who didn't grow up in faith communities. And he tried to find out what were the values that were universally shared. He came up with 5 core values, which I think are just beautiful: caring, honesty, respect, responsibility, and fairness. Those are the values that unite us, that bring us together, that build sustainable communities, not the values that judge and separate and divide us. That is enormously important, because now we can start talking about the things that we share. Now, we can argue forever about how to fund public education or what's the best form of taxation. But as long as we do it in a way that's informed by that group of values, we're going to come to really good outcomes, because we're going to have what? Respectful and civil discourse. You have to start with that. And if you start with that, you end up with coming to a really good place. So I talk about values all the time, because I don't see them as a bad thing. I see them as the foundation to what we're doing. Our company is a social enterprise. We started the company to stop kids from being hurt, principally from being sexually abused or from drowning. That's kind of the reason the company exists. We have a relatively simple but a pretty elegant model. We use the platform of insurance to gather a tremendous amount of data about how kids get hurt. We aggregate that data and then share that with our customers in such a way that they'll change their business practices to minimize the chance that something bad will happen. That has the benefit of keeping kids safe and healthy and driving down the cost of insurance over time. So we're nominally an insurance provider, but we're mostly about changing behavior and keeping kids safe. It's really important to understand that when we founded the company, we literally have a business model that was written on the back of a cocktail napkin. It says right at the top, says serve others. That's why the company exists. We didn't start the company to make money. We asked ourselves, do we matter? Does our company matter? In other words, if we dry up and go away tomorrow, somebody else will provide insurance to our customers. So we have to matter for a completely different set of reasons. We have to matter because we will help our customers keep kids safe. Interestingly though, top of the pyramid says serve others. Right beneath that, it says make a profit. And we're not apologetic about that. If we can't adequately monetize the work we do, we can't be here to serve others. So for us, profit is simply a metric of sustainability. That's all. And I would argue that that should be true for any purpose-driven business, whether it's for profit or not for profit. Now everybody goes, whoa, I'm not for profit, I can't have profit on there. That's wrong. They might call it a fund balance or a reserve or a surplus or whatever, but nonprofit, for-profit doesn't make any difference. You have to be financially sustainable. But interestingly, because we exist for a higher purpose, we are much more mission aligned with our customers. And by being mission aligned, when they do business with us, they recognize they're not just buying insurance. There is a competitive differentiation. If you talk to all of our customers, they'd say, no, I recognize I can get insurance someplace else. I choose Redwoods. We're going to be an operating partner with them. And so at the end of the day, quite frankly, customers tend to pay a little bit more for our products and services, which makes us a little bit more sustainable.
When you think about products that have social good in them, the question is whether people at the moment are willing to pay for a social good. And not only that, are they willing to pay in a social good in a trade-off kind of a way. So if I had a rule, I don't buy anything that is not produced organically with fair labor, whatever the rule is, then I wouldn't do these trade-offs. But once you start making these trade-offs, a little bit more child labor, for a little bit more saving, how much child labor I'm willing to do. Everyone has some of it, how much exactly am I trading off? All of a sudden these trade-offs become polluted, and it's not clear that at the moment your selfish motivation about getting something cheap is not going to win. When you stand at the shelf, the most salient thing is price. And price is not just very salient, it's easy to look at. It has decimals. Right? You look at things like quality, or you look at child labor, or whatever you want. These are hard things to grasp. What are they? The price, $7.29, $8.15, that's really easy to compare. So because price is numerical and decimal and easy to compare, it occupies a bigger part in our brain. That's one thing. And the second thing is that at the moment, that's the most salient thing. You're paying now. You're going to consume later, and the effect on the environment will be later, and the product was produced already. The thing that is immediate and easy to compare is price, and therefore people focus more on price, sometimes too much.
Yes, our t-shirts cost more because where they're made and how they're made. But there are people, again, back to food, understand there's a value beyond price. What's the social impact and what's the environmental impact? When you buy that apparel product in Bangladesh, yeah, the price itself is cheaper, but really what's the total impact of what you're doing there? What's the real cost of cheap? We're in a commodity business. We're in a business that, unfortunately, are valued on price. I'll compete with anybody in the world and bring price to the table, but also bring social impact, environmental impact, and then let's talk. But if you're going to come to the table and only look at for price, we're going to have a short conversation. I don't have conversation with the big box stores. I mean, they might put solar panels on a building and stuff like that, but they have totally destroyed the apparel industry and the apparel market, because what have they done? They have built a model on cheap, unsustainable transportation and labor. So when they come back to the U.S. and want to source, their apparel here, well, first of all, their margins won't support it. They're not going to, I don't think, greatly raise their prices. They're not going to reduce their margins. They're looking for people like us to make it up. And there's no way, when I'm talking about Bangladesh at 55 cents an hour, I mean, our average labor cost, so that's 500 people in North Carolina, is probably $15 an hour. The gap is so great You know, we have just totally screwed up and destroyed the apparel system. So it's that back to that re-education, buy better, buy less, buy local.
In a very general way, we are focusing on the short term rather than long term. And sometimes we call it a present focus bias, that we just focus on now. And you can see it everywhere, right? You could say healthcare, you know, good long term, short term donuts are really fun. Now with purchasing, that actually becomes a step more difficult, because if you think about it, when you go to a grocery store, let's say, or to a shopping mall, that shopping mall is defining the environment that you're in, and the environment has a large effect on your behavior. You might think that you decide what to do, but the environment actually has a big effect. And when you go into a shopping environment, you're basically in their mercy. They decide what kind of pieces of food to let you taste and what kind of promotions to expose you to. All the motivation of the commercial environment around us is to get us to do things that are good for them in the short run. They want our time, money, attention right now. So, you know, I'm not very optimistic that we can educate people about the importance of child labor, fair trade. And unless we get it to be something that like taboo trade-off, that we're going to get people to reconsider it and therefore be willing to pay at the pump or at the grocery store. You know, if you think about fuel, for example, we do have more clean fuel than less clean fuel. And if you had a one-time decision, like which car do you want to buy, one that goes on clean fuel or non-clean fuel, maybe people would say, you know, let me make this commitment. It's also a public statement. Other people can say what car I'm driving and so on. But if you drive to the pump and you can choose cheap or expensive, bad for the environment or good for the environment, I think that way too often we would focus on the short term, on money, and on being selfish.
As an individual, you start wrestling with these unfathomably complex problems. Peak oil. Wow, what are you going to do as an individual about peak oil and the fact that, you know, U.S. reserves peaked in 1974 and global reserves peaked on Thanksgiving Day of 2007, you know, blah, blah, blah. And you get into whether the Saudis are overstating their reserves, and you get into just an extremely complex issue that can be overwhelming, and maybe many people sort of go, can't deal. The trick is to get into the scale of me. Try to chase it down into a scale that I can understand. And what I can understand is my family's footprint. I can understand my electric bill. I can understand my miles driven. I can understand these things. And so by focusing on the scale that I can understand, I can make some progress and feel that I am doing something about peak oil. I am engaged in these unfathomably complex problems. When I started making my own fuel in the backyard, I slipped into this pathology of I'm never going to go to a gas station again. And when you do that, wow, do you conserve? It's Friday morning, your fuel gauge is on empty, your next batch is not going to be done until Sunday night. And you kind of say, well, I either go to the gas station and break my promise to myself, or let's see, these 3 trips to town. My wife's already in town, maybe she can pick that up for me. I might be able to let that one wait until Monday and do those 2 at the same time. And so conservation kicks in. At the time I was a metal sculptor and I put 27,000 miles a year on my truck. My mileage dropped to about 9,000 miles per year. And you say, well, gosh, that's not bad. You can have a 2/3 reduction in the amount of driving that you do. And the answer is absolutely. And in fact, I would say it's probably true in all of our lives. The really good news is we can all cut by 75%. It's a little astonishing, but it's there, and it's also, kind of fun. kind of rewarding. It's I treat conservation as being sort of like a game.
One thing when I go to and have a meeting, I'll usually ask the question, can you tell me without looking the country of origin shirt you're wearing today? I've probably asked that question 150 times. I've got probably less than 10 answers. The problem we've got today is most people are not aware of what they're doing. So every day they'll pull that wallet out of their pocket and they'll make that purchase of coffee, gas, apparel, whatever. And sometimes you make a bad decision because of the environment you're in. That's okay. The example I love to give people, it's right down the road here, is a fast food restaurant. And there's probably maybe once or twice a month that I'll end up there. And the reason I end up there is I'm stuck between two meetings, and I realize if I don't get some food in my system, I'm gonna have a hellacious headache, and then I'm gonna be not as productive that I need to be the rest of the day. But I realize when I go in there and buy that food, I'm not helping myself, I'm not helping the local economy. I sympathize for the chicken I'm getting ready to eat because they don't have the quality these chickens over here have. But at least I'm aware of what I'm doing here. But by you making a decision, by not being aware of the impact you have, that's the problem. That's what we gotta fix. And if we can just get people to start to be aware, we will greatly accelerate down this path and make our communities a lot better place. But the problem is we get so caught up in, we don't have time, or we depend on information given back to us. You know, this product here is $1 compared to $2. Well, that's got to be a better deal, and I'll buy it. There's things happening globally: climate change, peak oil, 9 billion people on the planet, access to cheap resources. That's not going to go away. Everybody thinks we're going to grow ourselves out of the economy. Well, those 4 things I just told you are not going to just allow us to grow it out of the economy. The way we're going to make it a better place for everybody, we all got to participate. The more you extract from the community, the bigger house, the bigger car, whatever, basically just pushes somebody else down. I'll never forget when we first started our business, I mean, success was determined by a country club membership and driving a Mercedes-Benz. What was portrayed as successful and the path to be on is really not going to work.
I really believe in local economies. I think it's the most sustainable way for us to go forward. The joy it brings to be able to have a business that counts to people and to me, and for people to be able to make what one of my employees called a right living. That is to say, work for a company where we're not ever going to get rich, but we are going to work in a way that makes us happy at the end of the day for what we did. Nobody goes home worried about the consequences of the kinds of work that we do. It's a good living for people to have. That is value enough, because if there are enough of us, if there are enough small seed companies and enough communities, that will make a huge difference.
The role of business in society today not only can be different, but must be. When we get involved in business, all of a sudden we can only talk about spreadsheets and quarterly profit statements. Those are important, but they're not the reason we exist. The reason we exist is for love, is for service. We appreciate people who are honorable, people who do the right thing. Too often in business, leaders do what they can instead of what they should. We all know what we should do. Why don't we do it? because we have this set of rewards that incense us to do the wrong thing. And we now know that environments that are built around the wrong incentives make moral people behave immorally. And those of us that have the great blessing of leading businesses don't get to check our morals at the door when we come to work. That's a part of who we are. And so everything we do all day, every day, ought to be a part of serving. A business has the opportunity to serve its employees, it has its opportunity to serve its customers, but it has an opportunity and obligation to serve the broader, wider community. Anyone who says, I just exist for profit, is lacking in moral courage, because that's a person who says, here's what I think personally, but here's what I think professionally, and they're two different things. Not only are they different, they can't reconcile. We have the obligation to reconcile our personal values and our professional responsibilities. And that calls us to look the shareholder in the eye and just say, here's the deal, you're right, I am levying an undue tax on you this quarter because I'm going to take some of our excessive profits and try to help others. All businesses are not above, they're of the community. And so if the community is broken, it's just a matter of time before the business is going to be broken. There is, at the end of the day, a compelling economic case to be made that we ought not have poor people, or we ought to do all we can to minimize the number of poor people there are. Because at the end of the day, that grows our economy, that gives us better ideas, it gives everybody greater opportunity. That's a fundamental, almost a math case for that. There's also the moral case that can be made. You know, most of us have grown up in one or another faith tradition that tells us that we are our brothers and our sisters' keepers. We're responsible. And if you buy that, which I think most people do, then you have to think about everything you do as what am I doing for those others who are not as fortunate as I am.
The people that think that everything is a market take something very basic away from being human. Imagine I asked you for something simple like, would you help me change a tire on my car? Ask yourself, how likely would you be to help me? Now imagine that I offered you money. I said, would you help me change the tire on my car? I'll give you $5. What happens when I offer you $5? Do you say to yourself, gee, I get to help Dan plus I get $5? No, most people say, oh, this is work. I'm not interested in that. I'm not interested at all. Now, if I offered you $500, you would do it again. But what's interesting is that I can add money to an equation and make the motivation lower. So with no money, you would be willing to help. I add money to the equation, you don't get social motivation and financial motivation. The social motivation goes away, now you get just the financial motivation, and $5 is not enough. $500, that's enough. So what's interesting is what we call crowding out. Social and financial motivation don't end up, they substitute each other. And I think often we don't understand that. This is what happens when we bring things to the market. So think about something like pollution. Right? What would happen if we create a tax on pollution? There would probably be some people who say, I can't afford it. Let me look at how I save money. But there would be some people who would say, now it's just money. When we moved to Durham, we bought a relatively old house. And we decided to insulate the attic and change the air conditioning system and so on. And the contractor that came was shocked. He said, we will never recuperate this amount of money because we're going to spend so much money insulating the attic and electricity is so cheap, it's not going to be ever effective. And of course, financially, he was right, but we did not make a financial decision. We were saying, this is what we think good people do. We try to save the environment. We try to insulate the attic. We're doing all of these things that are not about economic efficiency. But if all of a sudden the computation was different, and it says it's not part of the social obligation of how we think about the world and our kids and so on, it's just a financial thing. Would you prefer to pay this amount or that amount? All of a sudden, we would have probably thought about it differently and said, okay, we'll just pay the tax for this and let's not think about it. So I think this question about social norms and financial norms is actually very important. And what kind of things should we not even introduce into the market? Right? And I think there's lots of those things that we should basically say, these are not things that we should make part of the market. These are things that we should keep as sacred values with no trade-offs.
My dad, who's coming to visit shortly, he's like 84-year-old veteran of World War II. My kids can climb onto his lap and he can tell them war stories all afternoon. The question is, if I make it to having grandkids that pile onto my lap, what am I going to tell them that I did in the war on climate change? Do I want to say, oh, we didn't try that because we didn't think it would work? Do I want to say, oh, you know what, we thought that would be too expensive? No, absolutely not. I'm going to tell them war stories. I'm going to tell them about the things that flopped. I'm going to tell them about the things that worked. I'm going to tell them about the progress that we made. And I'm going to tell them that I was in the war and I served valiantly in the war effort to make it so that the human animal and other species could sustain life on this garden planet.
At my age, you do start to think about legacy. I have children and grandchildren, and they're the most important legacy. But I like to think that 15 years from now, there will be a thriving seed company that's still learning how to do what it's doing and doing it better and better, saving seeds that might otherwise disappear if it weren't for somebody very specifically saving them and passing them down. And that will be my legacy.
Everybody has a part to play, and don't forget that. No matter how small the part is, it's the pieces that make the community. It's not the materialistic things in life that make us happy. Money's important. You gotta have money, to eat and live and stuff like that. But he just comes out, it's not the only thing. Money doesn't give you the passion, give you the heart. And it doesn't connect you to your friends and community. And there's more to life and business and community than money.
Often people say, no, I get it, I understand that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go off and I want to make a lot of money for X number of years, and then I'll start giving that money away, or then I'll start serving. And I would simply tell you that in many ways we're out of time. We are at a place where our global society is more profoundly broken than maybe at any time in history. And we have the opportunity to change that. When we start thinking about a business school graduating 300 people and 25 of them are going to go into nonprofit work or going to work for for-benefit corporations, I'm proud of that group that's bucking the trend and doing that. But for the 250, they're going to work for banking or consulting, and all they're going to do is make shareholders more money. You have to ask yourself, do you matter? The personal strategic question is, do you matter? If you don't do that, isn't somebody else going to do that? But maybe there's something inside your God-given set of skills that will allow you to help others. in a profound way that no one else on the face of this earth could do, I would ask people to respond to that. I don't miss a lot of meals. I drive a nice car. I'm not asking people to live a Spartan existence. What I'm asking people to do is open their eyes and understand the broad global context in which we exist today. We're profoundly fortunate, and there are an awful lot of people depending on what we do in the next day, week, month, year in our careers. It's time. Serve.